that India was invited for this, a democracies summit. Prime Minister Modi was asked to initiate the discussion on the open societies and open economies. And Prime Minister himself has said, look, India as a civilization and diversity, natural reinforces democracy. But there are specific issues. And I think in India that is seen as addressing those will reinforce its strategic opportunities today. Because I think while the strategic interests operate at the level of governments, there is also the public goodwill that you can lose. Because in the past, India, for all its other faults, there was a lot of goodwill because we were seen as a democracy.
Hi everyone, we're back with C Raja Mohan. We're going to discuss his column Raja Mandala again, as we do every week. So this week you've written on the G-7 summit, which Prime Minister Modi attended virtually, and there's been a lot. This is Biden's first trip abroad, the Cornwall summit. And the interesting note you've taken off from is the declaration, this like-minded democracies and an open societies declaration. So the one thing which you try to bring out in the piece, but I'd like you to elaborate a bit, if you could, is that there is as you've often said yourself, that nations interact with each other keeping their own self-interest in mind. So, and the US itself has been known to partner with many authoritarian nations over time. Is it a legitimate basis? So right now there is the China angle, there is the China moment. So America and China's relationship has deteriorated. Russia, to an extent, the West considers non-democratic. So there is that moment which makes India a player in a very big way and India significant. But how far is this democracy angle sustainable? So say tomorrow there's a rapprochement between China and the US. Will this really count as a factor going forward?
Look, I think if you look at the last 70 odd years, I think after the Second World War, the US had an ideology of promoting democracy, that they're working to make the world safe for democracy. But in the practical domain, in doing that, in confronting communism, they made partnerships with so many regimes, which are really brutal dictatorships, authoritarian states, including, Pakistan, so many military regimes around the world, because they said, look, it is a higher goal of defeating communism. For example, the whole jihad in Afghanistan, sponsored by the US to defeat Soviet communism. So I think that record is there. But I think but there is the ideology. And if your interests and your ideology are on the same side, for India, that's a big benefit. Because if you go to the Cold War, that India was a democracy did not make much of a difference to India-US relationship, though there was a lot of goodwill for India. US gave a lot of aid. But India's relationship with the Soviet Union, US relationship with Pakistan meant that Indian democracy did not have a decisive role in shaping the India-US relationship during the Cold War. But after 2000, Bush administration in particular has made that India is a democracy. Therefore, we must give nuclear exemption to India. India is special. Therefore, we need to support India. That argument gained ground. And India itself was growing economically. It was also good democracy. So it all worked together well for India. But now I think it is a more complex terms we're entering, but where, unlike China and the US, where there is extraordinary convergence of interests over the last 40 years, economic interdependence, but they had differences on democracy, but yet the relationship thrived. Now for India, I think an India that is open, reforming, as well as a strong democracy will benefit India. So I think it's an added advantage, but it is not the defining factor either way, I would say.
So the second thing, and I suggest everyone read the piece. The link should be in the description wherever you're watching this video or on the indianexpress.com. So one of the things you mentioned in passing in your piece, you mentioned in some detail, is this sort of beginnings in this summit of something to counter the Belt and Road Initiative. China's economic aid, expansion, infrastructure, whatever you want to call it, its footprint, colonialism, its detractors would say. So is there a factor that some people have been saying, given COVID, how it's ravaged economies, including ours, and China has come out relatively unscathed compared to many other economies, both in Asia and beyond? Is there a danger that the counter from the West, from the G7, India, South Africa, Australia in this case, that China, this sort of BRI can be a sort of Marshall Plan-like effect it might have. I mean, not to perhaps that extent, like after the First World War. America's aid really helped cement its position as a superpower, particularly in Europe. Do you think there's the West and India doesn't have that kind of economic might as of now, but the response is a little slower, and in that time, say in Africa and parts of Asia, China's foothold will be too deep or too strong?
Look, I think if you remember India's criticism of the Belt and Road Initiative, 2017, that look, it is entraps the recipient countries into debt, it is not environmentally sustainable, the conditions are not transparent. That critique now is widely accepted in the West, that there is a problem with the way China has structured the Belt and Road Initiative. So any alternative, I mean, that takes values into account, as the G7 statement says, is environmentally sustainable, is more transparent in the terms it negotiates. So I think that is a welcome initiative. But here is the problem. Chinese are driven by the state, they're putting lots of money, while the initiative that was outlined by the G7 yesterday, I mean, they really have not put any money out there. They're saying we'll take you to our lending institutions, our private sector. So I think it's going to take some time for them to add, as an idea, it is good, but it needs more meat on the bones in terms of actually saying, look, this is the money we'll put, these are the terms and conditions. So what they're saying is that look, they're going to form some kind of a review, some kind of a committee that would design this new approach. Because in Europe already spends a lot of money on infrastructure. Japan spends a lot of money on infrastructure. So I think it's not shortage of money, but a mechanism to bring the Western or democracies' resources together to deal with infrastructure development. I think that's where the problem is. So in the near term, Chinese economy is doing well. Its Belt and Road is going to do quite well. And I think what the G7 is saying is, look, the US can focus on Latin America and Africa. France can focus in parts of Africa. India can do something in its neighborhood. Japan is doing in Asia. So if we can at least develop a coordinated mechanism, but then, a committee versus a single group, it's going to take time. But I think I would say, look, people want alternatives. It's not that people are dying to hand over sovereignty to China. If there is a good alternative, people will want to explore. So I think that providing that alternative is the key challenge, I think, here.
So towards the end of the column, you talk about how India in the last couple of years, there has been not a question mark, but sort of our democratic rating from Freedom House, things like that. There has been on sedition laws, on activists being jailed, and what's the conversations we're having in India about Indian democracy also find resonance in those same debates happening in the international press as well, including in America and England especially. How do you see, of course, on the one hand, that will not affect long-term relation strategic interests, but especially like when you, in this piece, when you talk about this ideology and strategic interests sort of aligning in this moment, values and interests both. Do you think, if not, do you think even sometimes the reaction of the government domestically, they cannot believe it is not being seen? Say when a foreign minister or a senior cabinet minister pulls up journalists or makes a big deal about even a mediocre piece in a foreign publication on, say, Central Vista. How do you think that, will that even in a small way affect this kind of alliance going forward for India and the West?
My sense is that, look, I don't think India, if India becomes defensive on this, the government in particular, it'll complicate matters further. I think there is a case to explain what India is doing. So one is the communication question, that whether it's internal communication or external. After all, much of the world is simply tracking the Indian media debate. It's not that they're inventing an argument, because India is in a polarized state. There are serious arguments. There are big issues on citizenship, on the question of Kashmir and its relationship with the Union. So there are big issues and there are big debates that are unfolding. So in a polarized environment, of course, the debates tend to get sharp, and internationally, it also gets picked up. So my sense is, look, it is to India's advantage that if it's seen as strengthening its democracy, after all, no democracy is perfect. No one can say that, look, they got the perfect model and everybody else has to follow that model. In fact, today, if you look at the Biden administration's argument, it is saying, look, US democracy as a whole. In fact, many of them today argue defending democracy today rather than promoting democracy, that you need to build your own, strengthen your own democracy to impress the rest of the world. So I think for in India, that is seen as renewing its democracy. Because laws like sedition laws, they've been around for so long. I mean, multiple governments. They've been used, misused, all kinds of things have happened. So I think the legitimate demands of reworking, strengthening India's structure of governance, the criminal justice system, center-state relationship, a whole lot of areas. I think even making an effort will have a positive impact on the rest of the world, rather than merely saying, look, I don't care for what you say. But my sense is that India was invited for this, a democracy summit. Prime Minister Modi was asked to initiate the discussion on the open societies and open economies. And Prime Minister himself has said, look, India as a civilization and diversity, natural reinforces democracy. But there are specific issues. And I think in India that is seen as addressing those will reinforce its strategic opportunities today. Because I think while the strategic interests operate at the level of governments, there is also the public goodwill that you can lose. Because in the past, India, for all its other faults, there was a lot of goodwill because we were seen as a democracy. So I think that it's a bonus. It's a good bonus to have, and it's good for India. It's not that we must do this to please the rest of the world, because you need it for our own strength. Because a strong India that builds on the foundations of its diversity and its democratic traditions will be able to deal with the rest of the world in a more effective way, because we have problems on our borders. Post-COVID, our economy is on a downturn. So I think for us, a renewal of Indian democracy, restoring internal coherence, and rebuilding a broad political consensus within will strongly reinforce India's international possibilities at this stage.
Great, sir. Thanks so much. We'll see you again next week. Thanks a lot.